Good morning. I gotta say, man, I'm so proud of you guys for making it up this early. I really appreciate it. So my name is Vinny DaSilva, and I'm a developer evangelist with Vuforia. And I'm here to talk to you guys about augmented reality. Any sufficiently advanced tech is indistinguishable from magic. Arthur C. Clarke. Now I know this quote's a little bit overused, but I think it's really appropriate. I think most people would agree that when they see AR for the first time, it's kind of magical. And it's been an incredible year for augmented reality. A lot of things have been happening, and I have a lot of things I want to share with you guys. I'm really excited to share with you. Now, how many of you guys have used Vuforia in the past? Oh, awesome. Lots of folks. Cool. Great. So we'll go over some new stuff, and then we'll go over some stuff that you've probably already seen, but I'm sure it'll be awesome for everybody. So we're at Unite Austin, so I'm assuming you guys create your content in Unity. Vuforia now is integrated into Unity. And what that means is that you continue creating your content in Unity, and then you use Vuforia to put it into the real world. And because Vuforia is integrated into Unity, you can expect to see new versions of Vuforia alongside new versions of Unity. Now, Vuforia helps developers put their content into the real world by using advanced computer vision. It's this advanced computer vision that gives us a really deep understanding of our environment and the objects, and this allows us to augment our world. And in my opinion, this is the advanced computer vision that's pretty indistinguishable from magic. When you use Vuforia, you're essentially putting an eye into the world in your games. Now, when we think about putting content into the world, we think about putting content into two types of places. We put content on objects, posters, books, board games, and we can also place them relative to the environment, right? We can put them on tabletops, on floors, we can put them floating in the room. Most ARKit apps that you've probably seen today, that's what this does. That's what they do. Now, I'm assuming, just curious, how many of you guys have used ARCore? Okay, cool, awesome, that's good to hear. How many of you use ARKit? All right, cool, awesome. So if you're interested in what Vuforia is going to do with environments, ARKit, and ARCore, I highly suggest you check out the talk later today, this afternoon, where we'll go pretty deep into some environmental stuff. Now, when we're talking about objects, so this talk here, we're going to really focus on objects. And we're talking about objects, it's really important to talk about interactivity. VR developers today know that there are a lot of hard problems to deal with when dealing with interactivity in VR, with virtual objects. And in augmented reality, we have a whole new set of problems dealing with interactivity with real-world objects. If we really want to meet the player's expectations of affordance, we really need to be able to augment objects. Now, there are lots of ways for us to augment objects with Vuforia. One really interesting way is by using what we call view marks. View marks not only allow us to augment objects, but they allow us to uniquely identify objects down to a serial number level. In toys and board games, this is particularly useful for unlockables. Image targets are our most popular form of object augmentation. These are going to be posters, playing cards, board games, any sort of flat surface with imagery that we can augment. If you want another dimension, you want to use a cuboid. So these are boxes, packaging, and if you guys have heard of the really awesome Merge Cube, this is the tech that drives that. Cylinder targets are a lot of fun. You can augment bottles, so we have a lot of work with wine bottles. The quick little snippet that I showed you earlier with the mug, that's another cylinder target. So a lot of interesting things that we can do with cylinders. And if you're looking to augment a small, rigid object like a toy, object target's the way to go. And all of this is available today with Vuforia. Now, what all of these objects have in common is that they all have intricate visual detail. That is, there's there's natural features in the imagery that allows us to track with computer vision. But what about objects that don't have this sort of intricate visual detail? Objects like cars, and if any of you tried, it's really tricky nowadays to augment cars. If you guys are looking at doing something with appliances, that's also interesting. 3D printer parts, industrial equipment, and engines. These all have been a challenge for augmentation today. Vuforia has introduced model targets. This is really awesome technology. And what this allows us to do is we can take a 3D mesh. We can take some kind of 3D, like a surface model, or we can take an engineering model, and we can process that, and then you can start tracking these objects. You can start augmenting these objects. With model targets, we can augment a whole new class of objects that we were not able to before. Objects that don't have a lot of visual detail. Objects that weren't necessarily made with augmented reality in mind. Now we've created some Vuforia playing cards that you guys can all receive at the booth, and we might have some here later today. And we did this because there's a lot of popular AR gaming experiences using cards. And most of the samples that we're providing in the asset store, they work with these cards. And what that means is that today you can go home, you can download the samples, you can use these cards and start making your experiences today. And I'm going to show you some quick demos of some of the things that you guys can do with these cards and some of these assets. Let's switch over here. All right, so we see 3 of our playing cards here on a table. And they all have augmentations on them. And we've added some interesting interactivity here. So in the case where you want to fill up the astronaut's oxygen tank, the interactivity here will show up here. So you can do lots of interesting projects with just these. Obviously, we want to encourage you guys to make your own. And then the couple of things I want to point out here is that not only is it super interesting to have interactivity between these different objects, but there's tools available to you with Vuforia that you really should take advantage of. So when we're talking about objects, we can know where they are in the real world, and you can have your content follow these objects. So when designing your experiences, think about different ways that you can interact with these objects in a more dynamic fashion. You know where the objects are, you know what awesome things you can do with them, and then you can tie that into gameplay and game mechanics. Okay, cool. So now I'm going to go and show you guys really quickly how easy it is to make something like this with Vuforia, from scratch Vuforia in Unity 2017.2. All right, so here I have an empty Unity scene. The only thing I did ahead of time was I imported some assets because I didn't want you guys sitting through the import. So I have Unity 2017.2. I think this is release candidate 1. And the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to go into your player settings. And at the very bottom, there's an XR settings little panel here. And this is where you're going to see Vuforia Augmented Reality support. So what you want to do is you want to go ahead and check this box. If, when you installed Unity, you didn't include the Vuforia components, this will turn into a hyperlink, and you have an opportunity to install the components from here. Once you have that enabled, you can go ahead and go into our Vuforia menu inside of the game object. So here you can see we have an AR camera. I'll talk a little bit more about this. And then we have all of the different objects that Vuforia can recognize in this list. So we have the image, the multi-image, the cuboids, cylindrical, etc. So everything that all of the different types of objects, you'll find them here. I'm going to go ahead and insert in an AR camera and remove the main camera. So the AR camera is going to be the main camera for your scene, and it's also going to be representative of your device camera. So that's what's going to provide you the feed for the device camera. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into that menu. I'm going to go into Vuforia Image. And then here, we have an image come up. And by default, like I mentioned before, we're including these assets, these image targets for you and other targets. So we see by default, it showed up our astronaut card. Now I'm going to go ahead and drag over a model on top of our image target. So whatever content you want to augment, you make a child of your targets. It's that simple. Now, Vuforia also includes some workflow tools to help developers get going faster with augmented reality. And one of the things that we do is, instead of having to sit through the process of deploying to the device and going through and testing it on the device, what you can do is if you have a standard webcam, when you run Unity in play mode and you have Vuforia, it's going to pick up that webcam. There we go. And you can see here. So this is all you guys. OK, so let me put this aside here and get some focus. And then once we have some focus, let's try that again. There we go. OK, great. So we see that our augmentation is there. And then as you move your card around, your augmentation, your content will stick to your objects. The workflow for augmenting other types of objects, cylinder, cuboids, all that good stuff, very, very similar workflow. We're really trying to make it super easy for you guys to create your content in augmented reality. Obviously, we also provide a set of APIs that you guys can use. If you guys want to get sort of into the weeds, you guys want to customize your experience further, I welcome you guys to try that out. That's where a lot of exciting things happen in AR. So I showed you guys some of the stuff that you guys can do with Vuforia today and how easy it is to actually start augmenting objects. Now, I don't know if you guys are like me, but I've really been dying to get a 3D printer. And I've been waiting for an excuse to get one. And model targets was my reason to get a 3D printer. And we were thinking about like what kind of content we can show off with model targets, something that would be interesting. We talked a lot about what kind of things we could do, and then we discussed this idea of printing out a model of the Mars Viking lander. And that's exactly what we did. So we printed out a model of the Viking lander. Now, it's a little beat up, and I have to admit, so I think it's fascinating that 40 years ago, NASA sent a real Viking lander to Mars, and it made it there pretty safely. And I could not get this thing from San Diego to Austin without breaking. And so here's a quick little sneak peek of some things that we could do. So when we were discussing, okay, now that we have this lander, what do we do with it? And our president, Jay, said, like, why don't we set it on fire? And I'm like, yeah, let's do that. Let's set it on fire. So here I have a project already loaded. And you can see that right now I'm looking at the Mars lander. You guys can see here. And on the right side here, you can see I have a little flamethrower that I put together using some assets from the asset store. And I'm going to go ahead and start torching this thing. So I have some particles here, and then start torching it. OK. Oh, a little bit more, and we'll get some smoke. There we go. OK, cool. So a couple of things I want to point out here. One of the things is that as I'm sort of moving around, you can see that our content, right, the fire, the sort of like the melting metal here, it's really sticking to this model. And you can see that it's really accurate. All the little contours, all the little nooks and crannies, they're really being exposed here. And also, something I think is pretty fun is that you can see that there's a collider on it, so the fire's bouncing off of it. I think it's really, really fun stuff that you can do with model targets. So you can get started with Vuforia 6.5 today to augment all sorts of objects. Vuforia 7 also allows you to augment a whole new class of objects with model targets. And if you want to augment a lot of objects today, you can use Vuforia 6.5. And if you're itching to get your hands on model targets, you guys can check out our website and sign up for early access. And let's see if we have some time for Q&A. I think we do. Do we have the mic set up?
When it came to the model software, you were talking about like using desk-sized objects. What about real-life size objects, like EC objects, like motors, for instance?
Yep. So with model targets, that's perfect situation. So we can track things like giant cars, well, not giant, but regular-sized cars, and motors. So if you're looking at using model targets, that's the way to go.
And industrial equipment too.
Exactly.
So I was also wondering about the way that it's registering the object that it's placing the augmented reality information on. Could you rotate that parent in such a way that it's common with how it would be in real space? So say I had like what I was trying to cling it to would be on the face, like an inclined face of an object. If I had like one of those markers on an inclined face, I can have an inclined face within the Unity space and then have the object that I'm trying to place on it perfectly vertical, for instance. So now it's referencing that parent object on an incline.
So with model targets, you can sort of set up your initial detection position sort of any way you want, but you obviously want to go through some testing and see what's optimal based on lighting conditions and the specific object. So I think that's just something that you'll probably want to go through. But there's definitely different ways for you to orient it, and if you need your content to augment a certain direction or a certain way relative to the object, you can certainly do that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I have a two-part question.
Sure.
First is, how do you see Vuforia working in the space now that the barrier to entry has dropped with AR Core and AR Kit?
Excellent question. So we'll definitely talk a little bit more about that in the talk later this afternoon, about exactly sort of how Vuforia plays a role into it. But our general idea is that we have, when augmenting objects, you want to sort of place it into two types of things. You want to place it on objects, or you want to place it in an environment. And Vuforia is covering both cases. And we'll also have additional things that you guys can, I'm trying to pull you guys into the next talk, but there's additional functionality that we're including that's, I think, developers are going to find super useful.
And the other one is, one of the hardest parts that we have is how do you actually get a client to want to pay for the extra money, especially now that AR Kit is free. And I've seen the Vuforia pricing model change so much. So is that something that you guys are going to address in the future?
Sure. So as a quick answer, Vuforia does have a free offering that you guys can take advantage of. But if you're looking to augment objects, there will be one sort of pricing model, and if you're looking to place content in environments, there will be another one. But certainly something we can talk more about, and if you want to chat with us at our booth, we can go into more detail.
Okay, thank you.
I guess mainly my question was follow-up to his is, can you give us some details on what the cost, as far as the developer is concerned, with using the capabilities that are coming in 2017.2?
So with 2017.2, so you're asking like what's included in our free offering, or?
Yeah,
So in our free offering, we're including things like user-defined targets that you can define dynamically, as well as our VR and stereo rendering capabilities. There might be some other things too, but I can't think off the top of my head. And then as we roll out future versions, we'll include more functionality in both our free offering as well as our paid offerings.
So how about image targets right now? Is that part of the free offering, or if you want to do your own custom image targets?
Image targets will not be part of the free offering.
Okay.
Just wondering if you could go into a little bit of how you did the object interactions with your image targets. It seems like the drone followed the astronaut around when you moved them around. I was wondering if you hooked into some event listeners to do that, or was that like custom coded or whatnot?
So I didn't work on that app all by myself, but my guess is that we're probably doing something like a look at in an update loop, right? So we sort of know where the objects are, or maybe we hit an event when we introduce an object, and then you sort of react to it. So that's probably roughly what it is. But if you want to go into like more specific detail about how we can do that, certainly we can do that after the talk.
Thanks.
But yeah, you can hook into event listeners and put your content update loop, just like regular Unity game code.
Okay, cool.
We do a lot of work with the Microsoft HoloLens.
Sure.
And one of our big challenges in multi-lens experiences is to synchronize real-world space to virtual space between lenses. And we've looked to Vuforia to place physical markers around the world that then each participant can look at to sync their locations together. What kind of precision can we expect from Vuforia targets?
Okay, so that's a tricky question just because there's a lot of things that play a role into augmented reality in general, right?
Mhm.
I don't know if you noticed, but at the Unity keynote, when they were doing the AR Kit, AR Core demos, they had a carpet on stage, right? Because they were trying to, I'm assuming they were trying to compensate for reflections.
Sure.
So lighting plays a role, reflection plays a role, environment plays a role. So all those things sort of play into ultimately like the sort of performance you're going to get from that. And it also, the size of the target relative to your distance has a role too.
Okay.
So like generally we try to say like try to have at least 30% of your camera's field of view filled with your image target.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things like that, and we can go into more details. And it's like so far it's super important for us to test augmented reality, not only from a performance point of view, but from a usability point of view, from UX, and then your specific use case, right? So if you're working in optimal conditions with great lighting, your performance is going to be one thing. If it's if you're in the middle of a submarine, it's going to be something else,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
So all these things sort of play a role.
Okay. Second question, excuse me. While Vuforia is utilizing the HoloLens camera, it
Yep.
degrades the rest of the performance. Is that something that can be turned on and off?
So I'm not exactly sure about the specifics of your performance degradation.
Sure.
Maybe that's something that we can talk more about because in general, people have been using Vuforia without a lot of performance degradation. So that might be something unique to the project. But you can certainly turn the camera on and off
Okay.
and sort of and work with that. So if you're having, if you need another process to access the camera or whatnot, you can do all that via our APIs.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
Hi. You show us how to integrate a camera in the product in Unity. I've been working on AR Kit myself, doing some prototypes. And is it possible to, when you do AR Kit, you got to integrate just their own camera. Is it possible to mix and match both? If I want to do markerless detection and use the AR Kit, because they will.
So the short answer is yes with Vuforia 7.
Okay.
Vuforia 7 will include some support for ARKit and ARCore.
And that's going to be out? No idea.
Probably next iteration of Unity.
Okay. Thanks.
Morning.
Good morning.
Excuse me. So 2 questions. The model recognition, how much of the target do you have to see to be able to recognize it as a model versus a static image?
I believe the answer is that when you're setting up your model target, you set up initial detection position. So you have some control over that. But what I would recommend is if you're talking about like something that's very large and the user is generally close, right, to it. So example is like a dashboard, right, on a car. That's a really popular use case. People want to augment all sorts of things on dashboards for all sorts of fun reasons. What we recommend is don't try to augment the entire dashboard. Augment points of interest in the dashboard, right? So like, oh, here's your center console, and then you can load in your model data for that. And then when the user's looking at it or paying attention, that will be augmented, and then you can move on to different parts. So that's what we're recommending for right now. just because that way, it generally makes sense from a usability point of view, right? You're not paying attention to the entire dashboard at the same time when you're that close to it, right? You're paying attention to features here or there. So that's what we're generally recommending.
Which is the follow-up question, can you recognize simultaneous objects in a scene?
I'm not totally sure. I'd have to follow up with you on that.
Okay.
So feel free to catch up with me later, and then I'll try to get you an answer.
I have your business card. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Okay, so this goes back to like real world scale stuff. If you were to acquire an object that was printed into the software, like I had a model of a 3D scan of an object, would I be able to determine the position of the camera with reference to that object also?
Yes. So in Vuforia, we have a couple different modes that you can configure your camera. Let me load up Unity here.
Essentially, imagine that I have a motor that's in a specific spot that's relative to UTM space. So coordinates are very specific, and I want to know where I am with reference to that object.
Yeah, so in your AR camera, you can configure your world center mode. And what you can do is you can say something like specific target, and that way it's going to make your origin of your scene that target. And then once you know that, your camera will move relative to the target.
So rather than having the object move around the camera's moving around the object.
Yep, exactly.
And then the object within the model space can then be in whatever coordinate system it's in, and it'll be relative to that coordinate space.
Yes. Yep.
Awesome, thanks.
Absolutely. Cool. Any other questions? All right, I want to thank you guys all so much for making it out early this morning. I know it was a late last night for a lot of you. I really appreciate it. Again, my name is Vinny DaSilva. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you so much.